So this is just a very quick overview and how-to for my vector topographic map pack. So once you download and unzip the file that you download, you'll be presented with the vector topographic map folder. Once you open that up, there'll be some different folders and items inside here that you might find helpful. So first up, we have an EPS folder full of 20 different EPS files. The same goes for Illustrator files, Photoshop files, which are broken into 2 parts with 10 textures inside each part. There is a PNG folder where there are transparent background PNGs that are 3000 by 3000 pixels. There's the bonus item that's called the Rough Edges Automator that I basically included because the effects look super cool on these various topographic maps, and I thought because it looks so cool, I just throw this in here for essentially free, although you have to buy the item, so it's not really free, it's more of just a bonus. But inside here, there's individual instructions for the Rough Edges Automator. So feel free to check those out if you have questions using the Rough Edges Automator, which is made for Photoshop, but I will be going over that very quickly in this video too. Also included is a texture reference guide, which I'll go over very shortly right here, and then the tutorials and more link, which is how you probably came to see this video. It basically gives links to this video, so if you're already here, you're pretty good to go on that one. So first up here, we have the texture reference guide, where I just put all 20 textures in a nice and easy to way see, so that you can very quickly reference which texture you like and find out what the file name for that texture is. So with each of these textures, it'll say something like texture 1, texture 2, etc., and that will be the file name. So if the file name is 1.ai for an Illustrator file, that's texture 1. If it's 3.ai or 3.eps, that's texture 3. So that's just a really fast way to sort through this. And textures 1 through 10 are labeled part 1 because they are part 1 of the Photoshop file, and textures 11 through 20 are called part 2 because they're in part 2 of the Photoshop file. But each layer will be named for that specific texture inside Photoshop, so these texture numbers still totally apply to that. But that's it for the texture reference guide. I found it super helpful when making some of the thumbnail images for this product, so hopefully you also find it helpful for very quickly referencing which textures will work perfectly for your particular project. So first up, we're actually going to jump into Photoshop here because I want to show off the Rough Edges Automator very, very quickly. And the instructions of the Rough Edges Automator will go through how to install that, so be sure to check that out and install that before you watch this. But here is the part 1 Photoshop file where there are these 10 different textures that are all numbered based on whatever the numbers are in that texture reference guide. So it should be pretty easy for you to go in here and kind of see what's going on. And just as a note with the Rough Edges Automator, it is all size-based or pixel-based. So I've found it's very helpful to do this at a larger scale. So I'm just going to go to image and then image size, and I'm going to quickly scale this up to something like, let's call it 2000 by 2000 pixels. And these are all 2001. These are all vector smart objects, so the Photoshop files, you can scale these textures up as big or as small as you want, and they're not going to lose quality, which is kind of nice. So once you want to apply the Rough Edges Automator to a particular texture, I have it opened up here in the Actions window. You can get to the Actions window by going to Window and then Actions near the top here. But the instructions for the Automator itself will go over this. Just make sure you select whichever texture it is that you want to apply this to. Select the various options from the Automator that you want to apply. I'll suggest using light in almost every single case because it tends to look the best, but feel free to experiment there. Just select that, hit the play button, and then it will play that action. And as you can see here, it makes this look much more rough. It's a very interesting look for these various map patterns if you want a much more distressed looking thing. And of course, if you use thicker lines for the textures, it also will give them a different look. If I go to here, for example, well, this is actually a very complex example, but what I'll do is I'll go back here, I'll delete the layer mask that applied the effect. I'll make these lines a little bit bigger here by just kind of making this thing look kind of huge. If I do this quick, and then once again, I'll just run that light Automator action. So you can see once the lines are much thicker, it doesn't look like it's totally destroyed through parts of it. It doesn't have those holes. It's just a nice rough edge that looks pretty neat. And I think it works really well with this particular map set. So that's why I included the Rough Edges Automator. I hope you find it super useful, and its usefulness goes well beyond just these particular maps. You can use it on pretty much anything. Just a general tip, if you want to use it on anything, I suggest rasterizing them. I didn't rasterize these because it happens to work on these without it because they have a transparent background. But if you want to apply the Rough Edges Automator on something like text, you'll have to go ahead and rasterize that text before you attempt to run the effect. But I'm going to quickly go over some ways to change stuff up inside Photoshop if you want to use Photoshop as your main way of interfacing with these textures. If you want to change the color of the textures, you can either go to the FX button in the Layers menu, and from the FX button at the bottom of the Layers menu, you can go to Color Overlay. And once you do that, it'll bring up a color picker menu where if you click this little swatch for the color, which made it white, thus invisible on my screen, you can kind of make these whatever color you want very easily. And that method allows you to maintain it being a vector smart object. So you can go ahead and make it whatever color you want. And it's still basically a vector as far as Photoshop is concerned. So scalability won't be an issue. Alternatively, you can right click on that particular Photoshop layer and rasterize that layer. I will say if you want to do this, maybe be careful not to save over your original document. Do this in a new document so you don't rasterize everything and then lose that cool vector ability. And then you could hit something like Control U or Command U on a Mac when you have that layer selected to bring up the hue saturation menu. You can hit Colorize, brighten this up a little bit, make the saturation more, and very quickly go through some different color options that way as well. Also, if you want to increase the size of the stroke inside of Photoshop as opposed to doing it in something like Illustrator, you can go to the FX button once again, select the stroke menu from the FX button while you have that layer selected. It'll bring up the stroke dialog box, which if you increase the size of the stroke on this right here, I have my effects button turned off, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that back on really quick. So here is the stroke, which is set to 6 points of pink. We'll just leave the color pink because it's easy to see on the screen. But as I increase this stroke size, and also make sure the position instead of inside. So underneath size, there's something called position. You want to make sure the position is outside as opposed to inside. And as you can see, this did a pretty crazy thing as this stroke is monstrously huge. But as you can see here, it's a very easy way to go ahead and add some additional thickness to these lines if that's something you want to do. And also, as you can see, it went ahead and made this a pink stroke across the blue line. So you might want to hit this color button and then make sure you go ahead and select the same color as you made the original line. This isn't a perfect color match, but you get the basic idea here of one way to go inside of Photoshop and make these lines thicker if you don't want to do it in Illustrator. And if you do that while it's still a vector smart object, it'll also maintain that vector editability. So next up here, I have a file opened up inside of Illustrator, which is actually the way that I suggest you use this. I think Illustrator is probably the best way of interfacing with these textures just because it's very quick and easy to do so. But of course, if you only have Photoshop, that method that I showed previously also works just awesome. So inside of Illustrator, you can just highlight over the item that you have opened up. You can go to the toolbar right here and double click on the stroke fill. And you can tell it's a stroke because it's missing a box in the middle where the fill is solid. Just double click on the stroke, which will bring up a color picker. And then you can change the color of all these different stroke lines to be whatever color you want. So I made it this kind of very dark blue, and you can see that in action right here. You can also select this, and then from the stroke menu, which is under Window, and then stroke sort of near the bottom, you can increase the weight. And the bigger the weight, the bigger the line gets. So as I increase this, you can see it increases the line weight of the strokes. So you have to be kind of smart with the amount of stroke you apply to these different topographic patterns, because some of them, like this one, have a lot going on. So if you make it too big, like something like 7 point, these kind of run together and don't look so great. Alternatively, they're 1 by default, but you can make them really thin, like 0.25 point. So as I zoom in close here, these are very thin, very fine strokes. So stylistically, you can just do whatever you think looks the best and you should be good to go. Also, don't ignore your brushes window, which is under Window and then Brushes, sort of near the top here. If you select this and then apply a brush to it, it'll have some really interesting effects in terms of how it makes this look. So I only have a couple very basic brushes loaded up right here. But there's a ton of Illustrator brushes out there that might look pretty cool if you apply them to these topographic maps. So you can feel free to experiment with that. And then, of course, just do what you think looks the best. And of course, if you want to work inside Illustrator and then bring it into a Photoshop document, just highlight it, hit Control-C or Command-C on a Mac to copy it. Open up your Photoshop document. I'll just hide this one right here. hit Control V on a PC or Command V on a Mac to paste it, and then you can very quickly bring this vector object into Photoshop and sort of size it as you see fit. And also don't be afraid to size these really huge. If you want to use just a very small section of these patterns, some of these patterns are very big and very complex, but if you're looking for a more simple look like this, sometimes just making the texture really freaking huge inside of Photoshop is the right answer to get that more simplistic look that you're going for. So experimentation like that should make this set extraordinarily versatile in terms of the looks you can get. And then of course you can use something like this and have this looking pretty good. Go to that rough edges automator, run a light rough edge on it, and then as you zoom in, you can tell it brings some rough edges, which look kind of cool. If I delete this mask on that so it goes back to normal and run the medium rough edges automator, you can see that that's a much more apparent rough edge. It looks extremely hand-drawn, almost like it's chalk or a super rough pencil. Very cool effects, which is why I included them. But that is it for this tutorial / overview for this set. I hope you think this set's pretty cool. I spent a silly amount of time making it, and I also hope you found this video helpful. And also, if you're looking for more tutorials, there's tons on my YouTube channel, so feel free to check those out if you want to learn some other stuff. But that should be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and most importantly, thank you so much for supporting me by purchasing this product.